Well, it's a day of firsts. That's my first ever walk-on music. They didn't let me pick a track. Welcome. I'll give you just a few people a chance to sit down, but then time's a ticking. I gotta go. Hi, I'm Justin. You can find out all about me and everything that I do at my homepage, justin.searls.co, or email me, justin@searls.co. Hopefully it's pretty obvious. Today is a big day because it's been 10 years since my first Rails World talk. I spoke at Rails World -8 in 2014 in Chicago, but my career really peaked at Rails World -5 when I was invited to keynote in Phoenix, 2017. And I'm really enjoying Rails World 2 so far, and I hope you are too. You might remember me for having co-founded TestDouble with Todd Kaufman back in 2011, and amazingly, it's grown to be one of the most trusted Ruby and Rails consultancies in the world. So if anything I talk about today sounds like something that you'd love to see with your team, please reach out and let's talk about how maybe TestDouble can help you. Last week, I also celebrated the one-year anniversary of Searls LLC, whereas I serve as a co-CJO with my brother Jeremy. So that makes me the Chief Justin Officer. I'm responsible for most of the Justin-related things in the business. This is Becky. She's sitting right there. She believes in fitness, and she also started a business a couple years ago called Build with Becky. How it works is that she builds strength training programs for people and then distributed them manually to all of her subscribers, which quickly presented a scaling issue. And like a lot of founders, she decided to scale with software. She also expanded the brand to better incorporate other potential services. So now it's actually called Better with Becky. I guess that means we're making a platform play. But Becky is not a programmer, and she couldn't afford to pay somebody to build it for her. So that's how I got recruited as her first CSHO, which, if you're not familiar with the fitness industry jargon, that means Chief Supportive Husband Officer. And so I built her an app. And that's what brings me on this stage to talk to all of you today. So a few years ago, DHH declared that Rails was the one-person framework because it's so productive that even just one person can do something great. And I'm one person, so I figured I should use Rails. So I used Rails in this presentation. I'm going to talk about some of that stuff today. But I really treated this app, the whole development, as an opportunity to test David's hypothesis and ask, how does Rails empower me as a solo developer? At the outset, I told Becky she could have as much of my time as possible, as necessary, to build the app, but I wouldn't let maintaining it become my forever job. And speaking of the end, I have an announcement. This is actually going to be my final conference presentation. My life has been transformed, as I don't get misty right now, because that's just sweat, by the opportunity to speak in front of people like you for so long. But there's a lot of you. But I've decided I need to make room in my life for new pursuits. A lot of prep goes into this, and it's just a month of my life of nerves. So I'm going to just take a second. So next time I clock an anxious person, I'm going to clap in their face and calm them down. Today, we're going to talk about the 6 key muscle groups of the empowered programmer and discover different ways that Rails helps us get stronger as developers. The empowered programmer, first and foremost, is courageous. Let's begin with how even some of the lesser-known features of Rails can make scarily ambitious feature work achievable, even by a solo developer. And start by asking, what's the best way to prioritize a backlog? For me, I prefer something called the cone of uncertainty. And it looks like this. The beginning of any project is the moment that we know the least, so it has the highest risk. But as we build software, things become clearer, and that risk goes down. The cone gradually shrinks. Before eventually we reach the point of no surprise, where the work is finished and we can all look back and absolutely no one is surprised because we all know exactly how it went. Now, different projects have different shapes. You could defer all those scary bits to the end of the project, or you could pull that risk forward and address it right away. But you can probably guess which shape results in the best outcomes. The question is, of course, how do you control the shape of the cone? And it requires us to change how we measure progress. Is progress how much code we ship or how many features we deliver? Like in my book, it's actually how much certainty we gain as we tackle the riskiest features. So planning starts then, instead of like normal priority or what's in the MVP, it's asking, what am I most afraid of? And for this application, it was video. See, there's a lot of hosted video in the app. And if you think of a typical form field, there's just not a lot of risk. Like even if you have like photo upload or something, you can probably get away stashing that in the database. But uploading, processing, and hosting video, that felt really risky to me. So here's what risk-first planning looks like. First, you start by identifying the scariest feature, and then you make it safe for yourself to make a mess, and then you make a mess. But eventually, you figure it out, and then it's not so scary anymore. Anyway, that's why I made an Instagram clone for my wife, which, yeah, I know it sounds ridiculous, but I needed a safe, low-stakes way to learn how to host video. And my career's taught me nothing, if not that side quests are one of the most effective ways to learn a new skill. So this is what Becky's Instagram looks like, and this is Beckygram. Everything that she posts here actually syndicates to Instagram, so she can create content in a place that she owns without also disappearing from the internet. So let's do a quick demo of the admin to show off the active storage stuff. So I started with what I know, a basic form and file input. Okay, so let's pick out a movie at random. But I had no clue what to do when the user clicks save. And fortunately, I didn't have to worry for too long because I already spoiled it. I selected active storage because Rails ships with it. And it shipped with it since 2016 with Rails 5. But it's improved a ton since then. Of course, Aaron and I actually paired and fixed a few bugs earlier this year, so it still has its rough edges. The upload story is complex enough that I had to draw a diagram. What happens when you click save? Well, first, the file itself is directly uploaded to S3 using JavaScript. And then the form is submitted to the server, which then enqueues a background job called analyze job, which then the worker downloads the thing from S3 so that it can run ffmpeg to do the thumbnails and stuff, and then upload whatever thumbnails the app needs, that might sound like a lot. And it is a lot, but video is complicated, and trust me, active storage actually does handle all the heavy lifting there. It's really nice. So the payoff is now that when you click save, the file is uploaded, the video is viewable, and it may not be super exciting, but that's not the point. It doesn't feel scary anymore. So unfortunately, implementing active storage in an app is a way bigger topic than I have time for today, so I wrote a post with all my lessons learned, and you can go check it out after the talk. But the truth is, it takes courage to slow down when you feel pressure to go faster. Slow makes smooth, and smooth makes fast. So yeah, could I have solved this without active storage? Sure, but active storage existence helped me overcome my fear because so many other people trust it for their apps. Next, the empowered programmer is resilient. Let's take a tour of different new features in Rails that make things way more maintainable for developers over the long term. Now, my main goal in life and in development is to minimize future regret. That's why I get on stage. But Rails 7 helped me avoid 3 areas where I've had regrets in the past. And let's start with authentication, and why I decided on email-based login. Now, everyone has an opinion on login strategy. You might consider passwords, or OAuth providers, or passkeys, or email. But when users forget a password, you need a trusted email. And if an API goes dark, you better hope that you have their email. And if a passkey is created on an iPhone and then the user can't log in on Windows, they're going to contact support and email you. So the lowest common denominator is email, and I figured, why complicate it? Something's going to defeat email someday, but it's not going to be my dinky little app. So my favorite feature of Rails 7.1 was a couple methods. One is generates token for, that creates a secure a token for a model, and a sister method, find by token for. And with just these two, you can implement email-based authentication. It looks a little like this. So in a model, I can configure a 30-minute token here, and then in a login controller, when they try to submit, you can generate that token and then pass it off to a mailer. And then in email, you can render a link with the token as a query param, so that when the user actually opens the email and clicks the link, hit up a different action on that controller, authenticate the user. It's truly so easy that I kind of don't trust it sometimes. But I've been told it's secure, so please don't hack me. For CSS, Rails now makes it super easy to adopt Tailwind, which is remarkably easy to maintain. Here's the app's login page. Note the effortlessly rounded corners. Making a nice-looking web page is really hard, but the true measure of success is trying to change your CSS 3 years later. Say you have an old form that you forgot even making, and you got to add margin above a button, this button right here. Now, if your markup looks like this, you're in good luck, right? You got margin might be tied to this class or or the button element or this ID or any of these classes. So then you grep around and eventually you find it and you make the change. And then you have to worry that you didn't just break something else in some other thing somewhere. And so the 3-step process to upgrading or updating legacy CSS is you got to find the rule, make the change, and then exhaustively test every page on every device. Easy. So Tailwind replaces your arbitrarily expressive CSS with predictable and familiar utility classes. What it looks like here forever is I know I can go into that HTML, that the button is going to have a class on it that looks like margin top 2, and if I want to make it go up, I can just change it to 4, and I know I haven't broken anything else. So that's why I always, whenever I'm starting a new app, I pick Tailwind with CSS Tailwind, and if you're upgrading an existing app, you can add it after the fact. Finally, let's look at the solution to many of my JavaScript problems, import maps. There's one thing I dislike about email-based login. You might have seen this. When I type in my email and then I realize that I'm actually on the registration page, and then I got to go click login, but then I got to type the email again because I clicked the wrong thing. So if you want to fix that, you're going to need JavaScript. And unlike most people, I actually loved building stuff with JavaScript early on, and then I kind of had a rough decade in the middle there. But lately, I'm having a great time again. And it's all thanks to import maps, where Rails 7 lets you just load raw, uncut JavaScript modules directly without having to do some build step. It's turned on by default, so there's nothing for you to run. And if you're upgrading an old app, you can run the installer and add stuff. Now, a few tips if you're new to this. You can vendor packages by running import map pin, and it'll download and put it in source control. You're going to want to make sure that you're serving those assets on a CDN with HTTP2 because it's a lot of little tiny requests, and those would all be TCP requests otherwise. And committing packages generally just kind of feels gross. So it's a healthy pressure to depend on fewer third-party JavaScript libraries, which is probably a good thing. No build is simpler than no build, so there's just a lot less to worry about 3 years from now. So thanks to enhancements like these, I'm confident that future me will be able to maintain better with Becky. That's a real shot. Better with Becky for years to come. The empowered programmer is also efficient. When conventional approaches would slow your users down, Rails lets you go off the rails and take shortcuts. So I've always hated when things take too long, and this project revealed quite a few call them opportunities for improvement in Becky's workflow. She has not seen these slides. I saw Becky spending a lot of time each month trimming videos, creating documents, fighting with spreadsheets, and then emailing out programs manually. But my sense was that she could achieve all those same goals in a whole lot less time. One way I save her time in the app is I turned off a bunch of validations. You're good to laugh. So this is a list of Becky's programs or workout programs, and instead of validating at save time, I built a custom readiness checker that gives a red-green status check of whether or not this program's ready to roll out to production. And that's because Becky prefers to go bottom up. So when she starts a program, she's diving straight into the workout. And you can see when that happens, the program upon which that workout depends just gets created automatically. And if the form's dirty, that gets submitted too. Additionally, she might go to the first block of the workout, and then it happened again. Now the workout upon which the block depends gets auto-created for her. Any good Rails developer would look at that and say, well, that's, persisting stuff when you click a link, that's not very restful, but everything in life is a trade-off, and the user experience matters more to me in this case. But it's not enough just to kind of get out of your power user's way. There are things you can invent to supercharge their productivity. So for example, I've got all these Hotwire combo box lookups where she will refer to an associated model in a form. A little stimulus controller I wrote generates a link that'll open the edit view of that same model in a new tab so she doesn't have to go separately hunting for it. Additionally, I noticed that when she's writing by hand, exercise names, she abbreviates absolutely everything. So we leverage that by supporting her shorthand syntax when she's searching for movements. So like, I don't have a clue what this means, but it doesn't matter because this app isn't for me. And if you prioritize something like this, like your users will love you even if they're not married to you, I would hope. But to be honest, as somebody who like just can't stand going slow, my favorite feedback is that I saved somebody time. So because Rails doesn't mind it when I start going off-road, my customer can get more done with less work. The empowered programmer is also dexterous. You know, if a Rails default would zig where my application needs to zag, it's really great that Rails makes it easy to swap it out for something else. So when a default doesn't fit, it's important to know when to buck the conventional wisdom. So Kamal, Docker, self-hosting, once, are all things I won't be talking about today. Because when it comes to servers, I'm still perfectly happy with Heroku. My architecture starts with a Heroku app server. It's backed by their managed Postgres. I use S3 and CloudFront to serve assets, and then also use AWS for sending emails. And I actually had to look all that up because I set it up in January and I haven't thought about it since. So that's a good sign. Another unusual thing about this app is that it goes out of its way to not store user data unnecessarily. Now, most apps would store everything by default, and say like every set and rep and weight would be separate database rows and in their own kind of tree of models. But they probably would find they never have much use for that data, and then they'd watch all their costs skyrocket in proportion to usage. So I've seen too many curves like this, where if revenue is a straight line, just as revenue starts picking up, so do the costs start ballooning. And I wanted to avoid that. So many times, us programmers, like, we actually add complexity based on the assumption of what other people need. So I try my best to listen to how customers talk about the features they want, and it can reveal opportunities to simplify. Like, for example, when she talks about working out, Becky emphasizes mind-muscle connection and setting weights based on factors that the app couldn't possibly know about, as well as dialing in a perceived level of effort as opposed to a prescribed amount of weight. So I asked her one day, it's like, what's the app gonna do with all these weights that people are typing in? And she couldn't think of anything. So I got rid of it. And the new approach is that the app only tracks the ephemeral state during a workout. It throws it in a JSON-B column, and then after the workout finishes, it exports the bits that are actually important permanently, and then it just deletes the rest. So if the JSON-B looks like this, there's some stuff I need to remember until the next workout, some stuff I want to remember forever, and then I can safely discard everything else. And so considering the app's data usage, I'm pretty confident that like once we start generating a ton of revenue, costs should stay mostly flat. But if you want to all go subscribe simultaneously and test that theory, that's fine by me. Good design means throwing things overboard that other people would assume that they need. All right, so talking about system tests, another weird thing I do is that I'm using Playwright instead of Selenium with Capybara. David recently wrote a post telling us that his test build failed, and citing among many other things, he talked about how sporadically failing tests were a huge drain on productivity. Two quick thoughts. Selenium itself is very, very slow, and if you squint, you'll realize that that slowness is actually the thing that leads us to write brittle assertions. So ideally, with a system test, a driver is going to automate something that the browser does, then make an assertion that waits until the browser finishes doing stuff, which satisfies the assertion, and then the test script continues. Now, if Selenium is slow in development, assertions might actually execute after the browser finishes. So what that looks like is the same chart, but just these two get flipped around. And if you read that, you're like, well, what's the problem? It still passes. Well, the problem is, if this happens locally, like while you're writing the test, then you don't actually know whether that assertion also passes before the browser action takes place. And here's why that's bad. So if the previous browser state immediately passes the assertion, and then the test continues before the browser finishes doing stuff, it's going to blow up. And that's how a test flake is born. So the ironic cause of flaky builds is that Selenium actually runs faster in CI because it's headless. Well, fortunately, Playwright exists as a robust alternative, and the reason it's fast is it's operating at a lower level protocol, so it's fast everywhere. The short version is just use Playwright. You can install that gem, and then like change 3 lines, and then you'll see a bunch of test failures, and those are all your flakes. They're just failing for you now, so go fix them. So I realized this is super counterintuitive, so I wrote a couple blog posts to explain it up on the website. So since switching, the only time that my build has failed, I'm serious, is when Stripe checkout goes down, which is separately concerning, but not my problem. So once you have a few apps under your belt, you'll find that yourself much more comfortable just swapping stuff out on the fly as needed. The empowered programmer is also disciplined. So we can learn a thing or two from Rails by being more opinionated in our design. Focus on building only what matters and then ignoring the rest. I believe that good software gets updates forever, but great software is actually designed, built, and then it just works. So we may need more practice learning how to say no. If anything, vision is the easy part. I can have a brilliant idea in the shower, but executing on that vision requires months of constant vigilance and saying no to distraction. So for example, I was adamant that we limit the number of user-facing features. So no to a more tab, or a hamburger icon, or an ellipsis button in the UI. Instead, early on, I pulled out a whiteboard, and I drew out the 3 tabs I knew we would need, and then I turned it around to Becky, and I said, what goes here? And you better pick wisely, because you only get 5. We eventually landed on those answers, and the tab bar looks like this, with the 5 tabs. And if you look now, same tabs. So no bloat. So that means it was 5 in February, 5 in June, and 5 in September. Like, yes, that was an arbitrary thing, but this is what people mean by a liberating constraint. It's a stronger product for it. This is what the members' program summary looks like. And while it took me all afternoon, I used CSS Grid to make this pretty little summary of a workout. So I went to show it to Becky, and her first reaction was, can I have a PDF version? And before I could respond, she said, actually, I need a second version of that PDF too. And I was so exhausted at that point that I just immediately said no, and then I had to back into a reason. So I said, I don't want to deal with fancy PDF engine stuff and I have to maintain it. Fortunately, CSS makes this literally possible with media queries. But Tailwind makes it easy because it's got a print variant. You just say print colon then whatever utility class. It only works when you're printing. So I was actually delighted to find out that within 30 minutes of just taking a salt shaker with print colon hidden everywhere, I could make the printout look good enough for Becky, and then the whole project schedule wasn't derailed as a result. Another day that she commented that users need to be able to search for movements and equipment, which is a reasonable request, but I was drunk with power at that point. So I reflexively replied no to any fancy search features, no pagination. I don't want to do any of that infinite scrolling UI stuff. Instead, I said, look, let's just load them all until it poses a problem. And it actually worked, first of all, because there's only several hundred things. But it only took a few adjustments, like a lazy loading images. And so if you've never lazy loaded an image, here's what an image tag looks like, and here's it being lazy. It's real easy. It's worth doing. The second thing I did was I used fragment caching in the view layer. And secret, I've actually never used caching in Rails since I started playing with it in 2005 somehow. So this was brand new to me. So take an example, if you're iterating over a relation of movements, you just wrap it in a cache block and you pass the thing that defines the key, and then that's about it. That's pretty cool. There is one thing to note, though, is whenever you have a belongs to association that you want to effectively invalidate that cache, you just need to throw touch true on it so that every time it updates, it changes the updated at of the thing that owns it. And you can stop. This concludes everything I know about Rails caching, so just go. That's not a blog post, it's just the guide. I also, because everything's already in the browser, I knew you could just easily filter stuff client-side, right? So she could have the search she wanted, and it would actually be faster. So this gave birth to yet another stimulus controller. This one's super simple, though, because on every keystroke, it just stores the query in a variable, and then every time that variable changes, it filters and hides the items. So I'm pretty happy, ultimately, with where this landed. You can scroll through all the stuff. You can type some words. You can check boxes for different movement patterns, and then zero in on the one, my favorite, barbell front squat. I don't know why I picked that one. Hate those. One of the best parts is that if my front-end code or what I'm talking about is interesting to you, you can actually, I've got source maps in production, so you can read all the code, and you can play with it and interactively debug all of it. All you got to do is subscribe to the app for $30. And it also comes with a fitness app. So learning when to say no helps me stay true to my vision, which leads to better software through discipline. The empowered programmer is finally meticulous. Rails is created by people who sweat the small stuff, so it's no surprise that it gives you what you need to sweat the small stuff too. Now, I shouldn't admit this here, but I actually prefer real native apps with buttons than web apps, pretending to be apps. At the same time, I also realize that these fancy gradients don't make this a real button, but what I'm trying to say is that I appreciate all the little touches that go into software. For example, when you are making a site a progressive web app, it can actually own the full display of the screen if somebody adds it to the home screen. And I was really happy to see David merge this, where now PWAs kind of are turned on out of the box with any new Rails project, but if you have an existing project, you can do what I did and literally copy paste out of the GitHub UI into your project, and then you can have them too. So let's demo a little bit of the player interface here. So this is the workout UI. Each set is like a little card and has a little instructional video there. And users can scroll down, they can see their past notes for a movement, as well as controls like complete and skip. And many of those tiles are interactive, so you can like jump around between blocks and then open up, expand the video and contract it. There's timers, things like that. It's a lot of fun. And whenever I've demoed this to somebody, they say, oh, wow, how'd you do that? And fortunately, most of you are seated already, because the answer is an 8 kilobyte opening div tag, because that's a stimulus controller, a bunch of them, and all of its data attributes are storing the entire UI application state. And the reason I'm so productive in Stimulus is that instead of managing separate server-side and client-side state, the DOM sits in the middle as the true source of record for everything. And here's how I conceptualize it. First, Rails initially renders the page, and then suppose that the user clicks the complete button. So that will cause the browser to trigger a stimulus action, which then will update the data attribute, which will have the knock-on effect of sending a fire and forget message to the server to update the data on its end, animate in the next set, and then update the current URL. So if you hit refresh, you're not jumping around, you're in the right place. I know, it's a lot. It was for me too. My generalized advice would be, when you're using Stimulus, just do whatever the server would do without JavaScript. Keep them aligned. When the user takes action, if you're able, optimistically update the UI, and then persist whatever you need to do via a fire and forget message that isn't going to block the user. Finally, make sure at every step that you're passing the refresh button test, and you refresh the page, and you're not hopping around. A good stimulus controller is like a good babysitter. It makes the same decisions that the parent would. As long as you abide by that, you'll probably have a good time. All right, so now a little bit of Rails magic. We're going to demo out a situation that happens in gyms a lot, where people are juggling multiple devices. And I want to make sure that they don't end up doing a lot of unnecessary activities and exercises because they forgot to refresh a page on one of those devices. So here's an iPhone and an iPad. Watch the progress bar on the iPad as they complete sets on the iPhone. You can see it just fills in automatically. They're immediately updated. And when the iPad changes out a movement for another one, that's reflected in all clients simultaneously. And if you open up that More tab and then start typing in a note, I'm having such a great workout, as soon as you blur, it's also going to be on every single client. So what is this dark magic? You may have seen demos like this before. It starts by attaching to Turbo's action cable using the Turbo stream from helper. And then in an after commit hook in the model, using broadcast render to point out a partial. And then you render a Turbo stream action, which I'm doing with tag.turbostring. Finally, because its job is to monitor what changes to the DOM, like new data attributes, Stimulus just does all the rest for you. This stuff is all super cool, but if you're like me, you got something to work once after a lot of effort, and then you forgot the next time that you needed it. And when that happened to me in 2006 with Rails, recipes were really helpful. Here's a step-by-step guide of when you want one of these, this is what you go through. And it's been a while since we've had to have such a mindset shift. So I wrote this little recipe for you that'll kind of walk through the same sort of feature if you want to try implementing it in one of your own apps. So I found that Hotwire generally recaptures a lot of the magic of Rails 1.0 while retaining the misery of unlearning however you used to do it. I continue to be amazed, though, at how Rails makes obvious things easy without making super obscure and detailed things hard, which, as a meticulous person, I appreciate. So next time that you start work on a new project, ask yourself which of these 6 traits might benefit from a little strength training, and what new features in Rails might be able to help me out. If you're interested in Build with Becky, you can learn more and sign up at betterwithbecky.com. And I won't say that I was skeptical, but I've been weightlifting for a few years, and I actually did last month's program that she put out as like to test the app. And I broke like 8 personal records, so I was pleased to find that it works. So good job. I'm staring at Aaron. I'm like, I'm not going to make a pun like, now that's a load test. But thank you for the groan. But even if it's not your cup of tea, maybe you know somebody who'd be interested. Please tell them about it. We only have, because we haven't announced it yet, this is it. We only have like a dozen subscribers so far, and so I'm sure Becky would be thrilled to get all of you and your friends' questions. She's much nicer than me, trust me. Test Double is also, we're here at the conference, we're sponsoring. We've got Fly in My Face, we've got kind of like an office hour sort of thing, where you can pair program or get some free consulting at the Double Up Lab. That next session starts like 2 minutes ago. You can go check it out there, and then during every break tomorrow as well. And I hope I see you there. Well, thanks for coming to my last conference talk, I guess. I'm done doing this, but I can't help but create content, which is like a phrase I hate saying. And I do have one breaking change to share. Just kidding, that's the name of my podcast. So, as Mike says, if you're still here, then there's a chance you don't recoil at the sound of listening to my voice for 3 hours. And if you're like Nadia, you might subscribe just so that you can kind of catch up with what I'm doing from time to time. It's a real laid-back, low-stakes, explicit language listen. Also, last year I started a free monthly newsletter called Searls of Wisdom. So like Eileen, I generally hate newsletters, so I strive to make one that's actually good. And if it can get Aaron to check his email, then I know I'm doing something right. Finally, if you want to get in touch, anytime, please email me, justin@searls.co. I'd love to hear from you. Fewer people email than you might think. That'd be great. All right, that's it. And I mean it this time. Thank you so much for being here with me today.